Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome. My name is Don Arleth, and you're watching World News Tonight here on TVP World. Now for the latest. Tonight, we look into the European political summit in the United Kingdom. Ursula von der Leyen wins another term as president of the European Commission. And later, we'll be joined by Ian Begg from the London School of Economics to discuss these issues. Stay with us. But for now, let's look at the latest headlines. Ursula von der Leyen wins another term as European Commission president and presents her strategic vision for the European Union. At the European Political Community Summit in the UK, leaders fret about a potential Trump administration. The Polish National Revenue Administration has opened 51 proceedings against companies that do not comply with trade restrictions imposed on Russia and Belarus. Ursula von der Leyen has secured another 5-year term as president of the European Commission. She won with a vote in the European Parliament of 401 votes in favor and 284 against. Earlier today, she also addressed Parliament with her vision of the future of Europe. The speech laid out policies for security, the environment, the economy, and migration, among other issues.
Votes in favor, 401.
After achieving this overwhelmingly positive result, Ursula von der Leyen now has a difficult task ahead of her. She has to navigate the EU's shift to the right and the Russian invasion of Ukraine going well into its third year. Ahead of the vote, she presented her 31-page plan for the next term in office, and it contains a lot of promises.
A vision of a stronger Europe that delivers prosperity, that protects people, and that defends democracy.
Some of her main policies include funds for investments, housing and defense. While she did mention climate change, there was significantly more focus on security this time around.
Well, I hope she will deliver. I think this 5 years will be very crucial for the whole European Union and for the future of Europe. While safety is, of course, the main word that we heard in this speech.
During the pre-vote debate, von der Leyen faced criticism from the far-right MEPs.
Pour l'Europe, mais aussi pour la France.
For Europe, but also for France, I call on the members of this Parliament to ensure that von der Leyen's past tenure as the head of the Commission remains the only one.
And place it in the envelope.
But this was not enough to convince the rest of the European Parliament to do the unprecedented and vote against the presidential candidate.
The Greens supported Ursula von der Leyen, and without the Green support, she wouldn't have made it. But I think it's a good day for Europe because we managed to build a majority with pro-European democratic groups without support of the far right.
Voti favorevoli 383.
In July 2019, von der Leyen was named president of the European Commission for the first time.
Madam President.
Since the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, she focused a lot on supporting Kyiv. She was one of the first Western leaders to make the trip to the Ukrainian capital and the site of Russian war crimes in Bucha. She now promises to keep up the policy of unwavering support for Ukraine.
Ursula von der Leyen was the lead candidate from the EPP, and although speculation was rife that she wouldn't manage the votes, she will be returning to Parliament for another 5-year term. Sasha Farbach, our Brussels correspondent, is on site at the European Parliament plenary in Strasbourg and has the latest. Hello, Sasha. Now, von der Leyen is back. What have been the reactions so far where you are? And also tell us what this could mean for Poland and its positions in the Parliament.
Yeah, hi there. Good evening, Don. Indeed, as we've just heard in the report, there's a lot of elation. I mean, very much the mood as we talked to various MEPs. The mood here yesterday was, even if you didn't like her and if you liked her, it was very much sure that she would make it. And that's exactly the result we had here today of those votes. Remember, it was 361, but she comfortably made it over that marker, 401. That's a secret ballot. Let's repeat that, a secret ballot, so we don't know fully well what we heard about certain MEPs. Did they support her? Did the ECR really break ranks? But we surely had some Greens and maybe even some ECR in the mix. But indeed, your question, truly, what does this mean for Poland? Obviously, Donald Tusk, a big supporter, the same group there. And also looking at now what's next. We're now going to have certain commissioners being selected. Now, this is an arduous process. We're looking into September, grilling here in Strasbourg and Brussels as well, but looking also in the Parliament's role of this, and those are going to be those committees, and those are going to be also powerful positions. There's over 20 of them. And we had a chance to speak to a Polish MEP, Mr. Michał Wawrykiewicz, who told us a little bit about what Poland could expect. Let's roll that now for you.
Polish delegation in EPP is the second largest, so its position is very strong, and we can expect chair of 2 committees in the parliament, including one of the most important like ITRE.
So there we have it, 2 very powerful commission positions here in the European Parliament. Also, the likes of, later when I spoke to that MEP, mentioned Boris Budka will be heading that one. He'll be the main candidate put forward for that. So this means more Poland in the Parliament, more Poland here in Europe. And that's the latest from Strasbourg. Back to you, Don.
Well, it looks like no major surprises there as those top jobs are being doled out. Sasha Farbach reporting from Strasbourg. Thank you. Thursday afternoon, we saw the end of the 4th European Political Community Forum held in the historic Belheim Palace in Oxfordshire, England. The meeting created a place for international dialogue on some of the most pressing issues Europe is currently facing. Our correspondent Claudia Travinska was there and has this next report.
This was a long and busy day for the 47 European leaders assembled for the meeting, including EU and NATO officials. Among these attending were French President Emmanuel Macron, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and Hungary's Viktor Orban. The topics on the agenda included energy security, illegal migration, and support for Ukraine.
For us, it's very important to maintain unity in Europe because always this unity leads to strong decisions.
In his opening remarks, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer reiterated his desire to reset the UK's relationship with the EU by rediscovering common goals, interests, and shared values central to European identity.
And so the nations of Europe must lead again today. Together we have the opportunity to make the world safer, fairer, and more prosperous. So let's use this moment to do more for Ukraine, defend our democracies, secure our energy supplies, and tackle illegal immigration. It is a pleasure today on behalf of my country to extend a hand to all of you, to say that under my leadership, Britain will be a friend and a partner, ready to work with you, not part of the European Union, but very much part of Europe.
The statement echoed a similar sentiment expressed by King Charles during the state opening of the Parliament on Wednesday.
My government will seek to reset the relationship with European partners and work to improve the United Kingdom's trade and investment relationship with the European Union. My ministers will seek a new security pact to strengthen cooperation on the mutual threats faced by the United Kingdom and the European Union.
The meeting also saw Ukraine's President, Volodymyr Zelensky, thank the assembled leaders for their unwavering support for Ukraine and for every life their support has saved. He also called for unity during this very challenging time.
Relationships with truly strong leaders. And this is our advantage, but it remains an advantage only as long as we are united. He may try to approach you or go to some of your partners individually, trying to tempt or pressure you, to blackmail you so that one of you betrays the rest.
The EPC created a wonderful opportunity for Polish and British prime ministers to have a chat after taking office in their respective countries. After the closing plenary session, the leaders were invited to take part in the reception hosted by His Majesty King Charles. What followed was a final press conference where Prime Minister Keir Starmer discussed the latest developments. From Blenheim Palace, Oxfordshire, for TVP World, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signed 2 new security agreements at that European Political Council summit today. Joining us now live from Kyiv to discuss the significance of these deals is Ukraine correspondent Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. Now, do you think Kyiv will be pleased with today's developments in the United Kingdom, and what do you think it accomplished?
Good evening. Yeah, I do think Kyiv will be pleased with these results today. Zelensky, about a week ago, said that he was expecting to sign 9 or so further bilateral security deals, along with 23 others that have been signed with other countries, including the United States, Japan. So now Prague and Ljubljana join these 23 other countries, bringing them to 25. So this will be a success for Ukraine, but it must be said this is coming amidst worrying signs from America that they could lose further military aid from the United States if a Trump administration comes in, given how Trump is performing in the polls at the moment. So Kyiv's strategy now really is to try and sign as many of these bilateral security agreements that will ensure there's further military assistance and non-military assistance from these countries, that these are written in writing, and that these will be maintained over the next 4 years, 5 years, forever, however long Trump manages to remain in post if he should win that election. So Ukraine really can't afford to leave things up to chance, to leave the future of their aid packages in the hands of an administration that does not view Ukraine as a priority, as the Trump administration would. So, look, there are still 7 more deals that Kyiv is hoping to sign in the coming week. I think they should be judged based on whether they manage to get those deals over the line and what that means for Ukraine's war effort in the long term.
Oz Chatterjee reporting from Kyiv. Thank you very much for that report. NATO's newest members, Sweden and Finland, scrambled fighter jets to intercept Russian fighters flying through international airspace above the Baltic Sea without transponders or flight plans. It came just hours before Ursula von der Leyen called for an investment in a European air shield. She was backed for a second term as European Commission president. However, while last night's joint air operation responded effectively at high speed, experts warn that Moscow also acts in ways that threaten civilian aviation safety.
A NATO Hornet jet intercepts a Russian fighter above the Baltic. In a similar encounter this week, Finnish and Swedish pilots teamed up to head off 2 jets flying at speed across international airspace. They were Russian pilots heading from Kaliningrad to mainland Russia. A Polish pilot earlier this month told TVP World about his encounters with Russian aircraft.
I think it depends on the crew. Sometimes they are pretty much friendly. They are waving to us, sending the greetings, and sometimes they are more aggressive. They want to show the armament, the missiles that they are carrying on.
Experts warn, though, Moscow's blocking of GPS signals above the Baltic and Black Seas threatens commercial flights.
There are other things going on, which are even more serious, simply because Russia is endangering even the safety, the security of, for example, private, civilians by interfering with the GPS systems, etc.
The encounter came shortly before Ursula von der Leyen called for major investment in air security, as she laid out her future for the bloc.
We need to invest more. We need to invest together, and we need to create joint European projects. For example, a complete air defense system, a European air shield.
NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg emphasised the importance of the alliance's participation in the European political community meeting in Britain.
NATO is, of course, a transatlantic alliance, but as you all know, this transatlantic alliance is the cornerstone for European security. So therefore it makes absolutely sense that NATO is part of this community.
An EU air shield aims to boost security. Until then, responsibility for protecting European skies remains with the bloc's air forces.
Poland cracks down on sanctions dodgers. Poland's National Revenue Administration is going after companies that continue to trade with Russia and Belarus despite sanctions on both countries. The prosecutor's office already indicted a Polish state-owned firm that sold parts to Iranian Shahed drones back in 2022. Mark Steele has the latest details.
Roughly 5 million euro. That's the total amount of fines that Polish businesses have been slapped with this year for skirting sanctions placed on Russia and Belarus. This may not seem like a lot, but it marks a substantial change from previous years. In the first 22 months since the sanctions were introduced, the National Revenue Administration handed out fines amounting to just 17,000 euro.
Polish authorities should look into files of newly established companies more thoroughly in order to search for some, I would say, peculiarities.
In 2022, a Polish state-owned company from Poznań sold fuel pumps to an Iranian tractor manufacturer. One of the pumps was later found in the debris from a shot-down Shahed drone in the Kharkiv region.
You can see how careful you have to be when selling anything to countries that are closely supporting Russia in its attacks on Ukraine. All such transactions must be scrutinized by the security services.
The company's former CEO has been charged with breaching Polish foreign trade law and could face up to 10 years in prison.
Were these intentionally sold knowing that they were going to be going into Shahed drones? Did the firm who sold them have any idea that they could possibly end up in these Shahed drones? Or did the company unknowingly sell these components that ended up in these drones?
Cracking down on companies that evade sanctions placed on Russia and Belarus is not only a duty of the National Revenue Administration. Making sure that Western entities do not support Russia's war machine is a favor done for Kyiv. Marek Steele, TVP World.
Romanian lawmakers have put forth a proposal to increase quotas on the annual number of permitted bear killings in the country. The move comes after the tragic mauling of a 19-year-old hiker who was attacked by a bear on a popular trail in central Romania last week. However, environmental groups say that this move will not impact the rate of bear attacks. Here's more.
Romania has Europe's largest population of brown bears outside of Russia. It has annual kill quotas in place to control the size of the country's bear population. The recent deadly mauling of a hiker prompted politicians to propose an increase in the killing quota from 220 to 481 on Monday. But experts argue that this will not solve the problem.
Hunting can have a role, but it's a fragment from the bear management. Okay, because hunting, as it is now, it's for trophy mainly.
Experts argue that the focus should be shifted towards prevention and intervention in dealing with what they refer to as problem bears. They list monitoring, using electric fences, and making sure trash is in bear-proof garbage bins as ways of dealing with the issue of the bears coming in contact with humans.
These three instruments, which from over 236, I believe, incidents that were 3 years ago, now we have 6.
The proposal is still yet to become law. The president has 20 days to approve the new regulations. During that time, he can ask Parliament to re-examine the law and make any necessary changes.
And now joining me to discuss the developments at the European Political Community Summit in the United Kingdom, a reset in EU-UK relations, and Ursula von der Leyen's Vision for Europe speech is Ian Begg, Professor at the European Institute of London School of Economics. Hello, sir, and thank you for joining me on World News tonight.
Good evening.
Now, let's start off with the European Political Community Summit in the United Kingdom, and Keir Starmer is looking for a reset in UK-EU relations. Now, should we take this to mean that there will just be some areas of cooperation, or could there potentially be a return eventually of the United Kingdom one day to the European Union?
I think you can take the latter as a remote possibility at the moment, because after the trauma of Brexit and the years which followed, I don't think there is an appetite in the UK to countenance rejoining the EU. However, what Keir Starmer is clearly doing is saying, first, the tone has changed. We want to be friends with our European neighbours and no longer exhibit the kind of hostility we saw, particularly from Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, two of our many previous prime ministers in the last few years. Some of his demands will potentially help to ease things. He wants an agreement on food controls. He wants an agreement on the ability of artists to go from the UK to other countries across Europe and not be hampered by regulations. But these are, let's be blunt, second-order things. So it's more in the area of security, which is outside the Brexit deal, that I think the most likelihood is of a greater new integration between the UK and other European countries.
Right, security cooperation will be critical. But what are some of the common areas where, after this point, it's been a few years now since the divorce, if you will, but where are some of the common areas that the EU and the UK could work together to further develop its relationship?
Well, as I just said, security and foreign policy in general are likely to be prominent on the list. There are some things the UK would like to simplify to ease the frictions at the border. For example, controls on food and food products crossing the borders. There are other areas where there's the potential for change, for example, in being more welcoming to students from other European countries, maybe not quite rejoining Erasmus, but something in that direction. In addition, the UK's re-entry into the Horizon Research Programme. These are all small things which eventually add up to a much more collaborative and friendly relation between the UK and the EU than we've had over the last 3 or 4 years, and even before that, after the Brexit referendum.
Well, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to what Ursula von der Leyen was saying in her Vision for Europe speech. And I saw two parallels there in what was coming out of the UK and coming out of Strasbourg there, and that is the situation with migration. However, the UK has very different problems with migration than does the European Union. And I'm wondering, maybe that could be a major area where the EU and the United Kingdom can work together as far as controlling illegal migration, people smuggling, things of that nature.
Well, one of Keir Starmer's initial changes since coming to power 2 weeks ago has been to abolish the Rwanda scheme, which would have meant deporting illegal migrants from the UK to Rwanda. He just said, no, we're not having that. It's stopping immediately. Instead, he wants to go after the gangs who facilitate people smuggling, and that can only be done by cooperation across the borders, particularly with France, but also Belgium. And he seems to have common cause with Giorgia Meloni in Italy about trying to find a new general European approach to dealing with this. We know that Poland has encountered problems on the border with Belarus. We know that Italy and Greece face problems of sea crossings, some dangerous. The UK's problem has been that although migrants are able to enter into some EU countries, they then want to go beyond the EU and country in which they arrive to arrive in the UK, where, let's face it, the English language is a significant appeal to them. His approach is to smash the gangs, and that needs European police cooperation, it needs European enforcement cooperation, and all sorts of other ways of trying to deal with what is clearly something that he really wants to nip in the bud and destroy as a business model, which is both damaging and immoral.
Another area of focus, especially at that summit there in the UK, are the elections in the United States and a potential Trump administration. In this event, do you believe that the UK, together with the EU, will they be able to shore up potentially any lack of funding to the war in Ukraine? Will Europe be able to handle its own security and the war in Ukraine at the same time in the lack of American presence?
Well, if the Americans do turn against supporting Ukraine, it will be quite a struggle for the Europeans collectively, and here I include the British, to substitute for what the Americans provide or have provided under Joe Biden's presidency. Yes, they have the capability to do it, but the political will is something which has conspicuously been lacking up to now. I'm speaking as a European here, we provide bits and pieces of support. We learned today that Germany is likely to halve its support for Ukraine financially because the G7 had agreed on a fund using seized Russian assets. And if you listen to some of the European political community speeches today, there was one very telling one from Mette Frederiksen, the Danish Prime Minister, where she was saying Europe needs to up its game. It needs to take this far more seriously because there's a huge threat to Europe. Quite clearly, if the Americans diminish their contributions to this, Europe must find ways of doing it. But what Frederiksen was saying in particular was it's now, it's urgent. It has to happen quickly. Otherwise, Ukraine will suffer, and other countries in the bordering or near Russia, and that is likely to include Poland and the Baltics, are also going to be hit by this.
Right, and what does that say about the United States as a long-term partner? Do you think these leaders at the summit today are really concerned about just that the U.S. cannot be relied upon?
They're bound to be concerned because of the noises coming out from Trump over many years, but also his selection of J.D. Vance as his running mate, who has professed to be uncomfortable with continuing to support Ukraine. Now, whether this turns into reality, were Trump and Vance to become the next presidential team, is something that nobody really knows. And a lot of diplomatic effort is going to go on behalf of the European countries to try to persuade the Americans they still need to be part of NATO, still need to acknowledge the threats coming from the Russians. At the same time, they have to prepare to do more on their own. And this is where the many calls during the EPC summit today were for increasing military expenditure, making it more capable in dealing with the Russian threat. So it's a combination of trying to persuade the Americans not to abandon Europe and Europe doing more in its own defense.
Right. J.D. Vance has come out repeatedly and said that America just simply doesn't have the capacity to continue to provide arms and ammunition for Ukraine, for Israel, and also prepare for some kind of conflict down the road with China in the Pacific and protect Taiwan. Is there something in that? Does he have a point that America can't be relied on to do all of these things at once, and therefore Europe should indeed step up and deal with its own threat, which is Russia?
Well, quite clearly, because the Americans put in a higher share of GDP than most NATO countries in Europe, Poland is being an honourable exception. And in those circumstances, the Americans are perfectly entitled to say, if you don't put in the resources, you can't really expect us to subsidize your defense to the extent that you've had it in recent years. So the challenge for the Europeans is to realize that the Americans are serious about this. But at the same time, I think it's probably a bit too apocalyptic to say that someone like J.D. Vance is correct in saying they can only deal with 2 out of the 3 threats or support mechanisms that you're talking about. The likelihood is that the war in Gaza will end sooner rather than later. It doesn't look as though Ukraine is going to end that soon. China is not a conflict yet. Clearly, they want to prepare for it, but it's not absorbing massive US resources at present. So the US has the capability to do all 3. It's whether it has the political commitment to do all 3 that's critical.
Certainly. Now, very briefly, anything coming from Ursula von der Leyen's speech as she won another term as European Commission President that stuck out in your mind? Anything significant?
I think what came out more than anything was her attempt to use what's been called triangulation. She wanted to make sure she kept the Greens on board. She didn't want to upset her own EPP right wing. She wanted to keep the socialists sufficiently on board. So she was going in between, yes, I'll support climate change. Yes, I'll go for deregulation. Yes, I will recognize some of the demands coming from the more right-wing parties, Whether she can sustain that triangulation once she's in a position of power again is going to be quite a big challenge for her, because if you don't realise or contribute to the expectations that you created, then you're going to face a political weakness.
Professor Ian Begg, the European Institute, London School of Economics, thank you very much for joining me tonight here on World News Tonight. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Bye.
And that's all the time we have on the program. Thank you for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.